Nameless warehouse inside. A man has just seen something no one was ever meant to survive seeing. His hands shake, not from the cold. On the wooden table, money changes hands. Names change hands. And among the faces gathered around the lamp, at least one belongs to a man he once called a friend. That's what stops his heart. Outside, an engine turns over. Headlights sweep across the corrugated wall, then die. Someone is counting. 1, 2, he takes a step back. The floor groans beneath him. Every face around the lamp turns toward him at once. He spins, runs for the back door. His hand just touches the cold iron bolt. Some secrets are kept with money. Some secrets are kept with blood. And tonight's secret has just settled on its price. The front door shrieks open behind him. Footsteps echo down the corridor, slow, unhurried. A hand comes down on his shoulder. 17 years. That was how long my mother had been lying to me. 17 years of believing my father walked out one Tuesday morning in November and decided that a wife and a 7-year-old daughter were a weight he didn't want to carry. 17 years of standing at a window on a Brooklyn side street, waiting for a man who had been dead since I was 9. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Adalyn Whittaker, 24. I grew up in a part of Brooklyn that didn't make the postcards. And the morning everything began to crack open, I was riding an elevator 42 floors into a sky I thought I had earned the right to look at. The building was Romano Tower, lower midtown, dark glass, severe lines. The lobby was grey marble threaded with gold. The quiet inside had a weight to it, the kind that straightened your spine before you noticed. I had walked through that lobby every weekday for 6 months, and every single morning I felt something close to pride. Because I had earned this, the 2 jobs I juggled through college. The 3 a.m., nights with my eyes burning against the glow of a screen. The mother who'd raised me by herself from the time I was 7. The year my father figured out that walking through the front door was easier than staying behind it, all of it, had led here. I deserved this. That was what I told myself every single morning. The elevator slid open with that soft pneumatic sigh. I stepped inside alone, pressed 42, drifted to the back wall, and then I felt it. Nobody else was in the car. I had checked twice, but the sensation was unmistakable. Someone was watching. My eyes flicked to the security camera in the top right corner. The small red light pulsed in a steady rhythm. Just a camera, except for a feeling at the base of my neck that wouldn't let go. I dropped my gaze to my phone. Pretended to be busy. The numbers climbed. When the doors opened on 42, I stepped out, walking like a woman who hadn't just felt something pass over her shoulders. The executive floor unfurled like a stage set. Glass partitions. Desks aligned with surgical precision. Manhattan glittering across the horizon. I made my way to my desk. Admin wing, 3rd on the left. Dropped my bag, woke the computer. Spreadsheets. Emails. A contract review that ate up close to an hour. And then, sometime around 10, my desk phone rang 1009. The number on the display was one I knew without looking, because it called at least 3 times a week with the same clipped cadence of someone about to ruin part of my day. Lorenzo Romano's office, the boss, the man whose tower I had been walking into every morning for 6 months, the man who tore my reports apart in that low, steady voice that never needed volume to empty a room, the man I told myself I hated, because the alternative was something I refused to name. His office sat at the far end of the corridor behind a double door of dark wood that matched its owner, Heavy. Imposing. Engineered to intimidate before it ever opened. I knocked twice, pushed the door open when his voice said only, "Come in, no please, no good morning." None of the small courtesies other people bothered with. Lorenzo Romano was on his feet. 35. Dark-haired. The sleeves of his dress shirt rolled to the elbow. Tattoos running down both forearms beside him. Leaning against the bookcase with the posture of a man monitoring the room without appearing to, was Dominic Reyes, Lorenzo's right hand. 33. The kind of presence that took up space without ever raising its voice. Lorenzo pulled me into the conversation with no preamble. The report I'd sent the previous Friday, the margins, a misplaced comma. The way he wanted the revisions structured for Wednesday's meeting. I kept my eyes exactly where a professional employee should keep them, on his face. Then he moved, a step to one side, a slight shift of weight. And the line of his dress pants adjusted in a way I wasn't remotely prepared for. There was no unseeing it. I looked away so fast I nearly pulled something in my neck, but the brain refuses to let it go. It has to loop back just once. Mine did exactly that. My eyes dropped again. Quick, involuntary, and snapped back up before I could fully hate myself. I clasped my hands in front of me, set my jaw, forced my attention onto profit margins. No more looking. He was my boss. But I'd already looked more times than I should have. And when I lifted my eyes to his face, what I found made the carpet shift beneath my feet. Lorenzo was looking right back, not at the folder, not at the report. At me, with a focus that told me he'd registered every second my gaze had been somewhere it shouldn't have been. Dominic straightened, murmured something I didn't catch. Crossed to the door, left unhurriedly, the door shut behind him, with a soft click that landed absurdly loud in the quiet that followed. We were alone. The office seemed to shrink around us. The air thickened, and then Lorenzo moved. He bent down slowly, set both hands on the arms of the leather chair beside me, brought himself level with my eyes. My body obeyed before my mind bothered giving clearance. I sat. He didn't step back. And then he asked it, the question that would replay in my head for the rest of my life. Why don't you stop looking at the bulge in my pants? The question landed in the air like a silent detonation. My face went hot so quickly I felt the heat crawl into my ears. I wasn't. My voice came out thin, collapsing before the sentence finished. You do, he said it, and the way he said, it turned a single word into something that had no business existing inside an office. He stayed there in that impossible proximity, 2 or 3 seconds that felt like years. Testing, watching, and then he straightened all at once, pulled back, smoothed his sleeves, walked around to his side of the desk without looking at me. Wednesday, he said. You can go. I left the office on unsteady legs, what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known. What known was that the question wasn't the beginning of anything. It was the end of something that had started 17 years ago. In a warehouse I'd never heard of, on a night a man I called Daddy had made the worst mistake of his life. He had seen the wrong people in the wrong room. By 6:30 that evening, I was on the subway heading back toward Brooklyn. The train was emptier than usual. The kind of emptiness that makes you notice everyone who's there. A man in a navy coat near the door, reading a newspaper, folded the wrong way for actual reading. His eyes weren't on the print, his eyes were on me. I felt it through the reflection in the dark window. A pressure between my shoulder blades. I told myself it was paranoia. The day had been long. Lorenzo had rattled something loose in my chest. The train pulled into my station. I got off. The man stood up. He got off too. I quickened my pace through the tile corridor, up the stairs, out into the November cold, but the man in the navy coat was 20 feet behind me, then 15, then 10. My building was 3 blocks away. I didn't look back. Because looking back is the universal signal that you've registered the threat. I kept walking, crossed against the light. He crossed too. At the corner of my block, I turned the way I always turned, and stopped cold. A car was parked outside my building. Black, tinted windows, engine off. I'd seen that car before, twice last week, 3 times the week before. I had written it off because Brooklyn is full of black cars, but tonight the driver's window was down, and the man inside was looking right at me. Dominic Reyes, Lorenzo's shadow, sitting outside my apartment like he'd been waiting an hour, and had another hour in him if he needed it. I forgot the man in the navy coat behind me. I walked straight to the car, bent down to the open window, found my voice somewhere between fury and something colder. "What are you doing here?" Dominic didn't smile. He glanced past me, once, at the navy coat half a block back, now pretending to study his phone. Then his eyes came back to mine. "Boss said to make sure you got home safe." "What?" "Every night." A pause. "For 6 months, the street narrowed around me. 6 months, since the day you started." "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment. "That's a question for the boss." He nodded toward the navy coat. "That one's been on your route for 3 nights. Boss wanted to know if you'd notice, and if I hadn't. He still would've." The window went up halfway. "Go inside, Miss Whittaker. Lock the door. He'll see you tomorrow." The window closed. I walked into my building on legs that didn't quite belong to me, climbed 3 flights, locked the door, slid the chain, and stood with my back against the cabinet, breathing like I'd run from somewhere. 6 months of believing I was alone on a sidewalk that was never empty. 6 months of believing the man who tore my reports apart in his office hated me. When he had been watching me get home every night, I didn't know what was worse, the fear, or the fact that part of me felt safer than I had in years. Tuesday morning, I ran the same route as always. Apartment, subway, lobby, elevator, 42nd floor, repeating to myself that yesterday had been a glitch, something that wouldn't happen again because I wasn't going to allow it to. I sat at my desk, powered up the computer, threw myself at my inbox. The wall lasted 40 minutes. At 9:40, the phone rang. I already knew what it was. I went anyway, because not going would have been worse. I walked down the corridor, knocked, stepped inside. Lorenzo was seated behind the desk. The whole register of the room was different. No smile, no provocation, none of the proximity that stole the air out of me. He gestured toward the chair across from him, waited until I sat. "I have a proposal." He said it, and something in the weight of his voice pulled my spine straight. He slid open a side drawer, drew out a slim, black leather folder, set it between us, opened it, a multi-page document. Romano Holdings letterhead. Signatures from lawyers I'd never heard of. I steeled myself for what I thought was coming. "Sleep with me." That was what I expected. What he said instead, I wasn't ready for. "I need to protect you." For 1 month, I blinked. "Protect me," I echoed, because I needed to hear the words come out of my own mouth. "There's someone who wants you dead, Adalyn." My name in his voice. First time. He'd called me Whittaker for 6 months. That's not possible. It's been possible for 17 years. He turned a page, slid a photograph across the desk. I looked down, and the floor began doing that thing again. The photograph was old, edges soft. A man in his 30s, dark hair, brown eyes that I had spent 17 years trying to convince myself I didn't remember. My father. "Where did you get this?" My voice was thin. "Your father didn't leave you, Adalyn." Lorenzo's voice was lower than I'd ever heard it. "Your father ran." "From who?" "From people inside my family. People who are still alive. People who would hurt you to bury a secret your father uncovered." He didn't say a name. "Not yet. Your father worked for our family in the 90s. He saw things. He understood things. He ran to protect you and your mother. He was killed 2 years later. In Philadelphia, the room tilted. My mother told me he abandoned us. Your mother lied to keep you alive." The words hit me like something physical. A small voice in my head started saying it. "He didn't leave you. He didn't leave you." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Lorenzo was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not arrogance. Not amusement. Just patience. "Why now?" I asked. "Why 6 months ago? Why a contract?" "Because last week Somebody asked the wrong question about you in the wrong room, and I had two choices. I could let you keep walking home alone with Dominic 2 cars behind you, or I could bring you closer. He pushed the folder toward me. 1 month. You stay near me. You let me protect you. After 30 days, if you want to walk away, you can. The contract guarantees your job, your benefits, your security. The signature line was empty. The pen was already in front of me. This is insane, probably. I'm not asking for an answer today, Adalyn. There was my name again. Read it. Ask questions. Talk to your mother. Then decide. I stood up. I didn't take the folder. I walked out on legs that were learning how to walk again. Past Dominic, who was standing by the elevators with a coffee cup. He nodded. Just once. I made it to my desk, sat down, picked up my phone. I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Mum, a pause. Honey, what's wrong? I need you to tell me the truth about Dad. The line went silent. So silent that for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her breathing. Then I heard her crying. She cried for 4 minutes before she said the first word. I counted. Because counting was the only thing keeping me from sliding off the office chair onto the carpet of the 42nd floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was the voice of someone confessing a sin she had been polishing for 17 years. His name was Daniel. I knew his name, but hearing her say it, after all those years of silence, was like hearing a door unlock from the inside. He loved you, Addie. So much. He didn't leave us. He ran. He ran so we could keep breathing. I closed my eyes. The 42nd floor disappeared, and I was 7 again. Standing at the window in our Brooklyn apartment, he worked for a family. A powerful family. He came home one night and his hands were shaking. He said, "They're going to kill someone tonight, and tomorrow they're going to kill me for knowing." He packed a bag in 20 minutes. He kissed your forehead. You were asleep. You didn't even wake up. Her voice cracked. He sent us money for 2 years. Cash in envelopes. No return address. Then the envelopes stopped. Mum, did you know who he was running from? She breathed out. I knew the family name. A long pause. Romano. The word hit the carpet. Then it hit me. I work for them, Mum. She was silent. I work for the man whose family killed my father. No, honey. Lorenzo was a boy when this happened. He was 12. He didn't do this. How do you know his name? The silence that came back was the longest silence of the call. 'Cause he came to see me. 4 years ago, Mom, he sat at my kitchen table. Addie, he asked me what your father looked like in the morning before he had coffee. He asked me what your favorite color was when you were 5. He asked me if I'd ever forgive him for what his family did. What did you say? I told him I'd already forgiven the boy. But I couldn't forgive what the boy had grown into. Not until I knew what he was going to do with the rest of his life. Then I told him to leave you alone, and he agreed. He said he couldn't promise that. He said the same people who killed Daniel were still alive, and he was the only person in the world who could keep you out of their hands. 4 years. The pride I had been carrying through the lobby of Romano Tower every morning, that pride was a building somebody else had built, and I had walked into it thinking I'd laid every brick myself. Mom, I have to go. Adalyn, please. He's not the boy I sat with anymore. Be careful. I will. I hung up. I stared at the wall. A motivational print of the Manhattan skyline. Where the future is built, I started laughing. Quietly. The kind of laugh that comes out when your entire life rearranges itself in 9 minutes on a phone call with your mother. I picked up my bag, rode 42 floors down, out into the November cold, until I found a bench in a small park 3 blocks from the tower. I sat down. I called Lorenzo's office. His assistant put me through immediately. Adalyn, I have questions. I know, not on the phone. Your apartment, tonight. Alone. No Dominic, no driver. Just you. A pause. 8 o'clock. I'll send the address. I'll find it. Adalyn. What? Thank you for calling. I hung up before he could hear me decide what to do with that sentence. I went to Brianna's apartment first. Brianna Holloway. 24. Freelance graphic designer, best friend since freshman year, the kind of friend who could turn a building collapse into a punchline, the kind of friend who knew when not to. She opened the door, looked at my face, closed her mouth around whatever joke she'd loaded. Kitchen. I followed her in. She put the kettle on. She didn't say a word until the tea was in my hands. Talk. I talked. For 40 minutes. She didn't interrupt once, not even when I told her about the contract, or the photograph of my father, or the conversation with my mother, or the 4-year history I hadn't known existed. When I was done, Brianna was quiet for a long beat. Addie, yeah. This is not a Hallmark movie, I know. This man has been watching you for years, I know. He might be the only thing standing between you and a bullet, I know. She studied me. You're going. I'm going. Tonight, at 8. You're not going alone. Yes, I am, Adalyn, Brianna. We stared at each other. She broke first. At least tell me his address, I told her. She wrote it down. She handed me a small canister, pepper spray. Don't argue. I wasn't going to. And Addie, if he turns out to be the bad guy, run. She paused. And if he turns out to be the good guy, yeah? Then God help you. Because that's worse. I didn't laugh. She didn't either. I left at 6:15. The sky had gone from slate to the color of wet iron. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't look for the black car behind me, because I knew it was there. The address was on the Upper East Side. A pre-war building with limestone bones and a doorman who looked at me twice before deciding I was expected. I gave my name. He picked up the phone, set it down, pressed a button. The elevator opened. No floor buttons, just a single key slot. He inserted a key, turned it, stepped back. Penthouse, miss. The doors closed. When they opened, I forgot how to stand. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The East River below. Manhattan glittering beyond it. Lorenzo was standing at the windows. Back to me. Hands in his pockets. He didn't turn around when I stepped in. He let me take in the space first. A kindness I hadn't braced for. I set my bag down. I didn't take off my coat. You said no driver. I came alone. Dominic in the lobby? He's not. Then how do I get out of here if I need to? Lorenzo turned. He had taken off the jacket, white shirt. Sleeves rolled. He didn't approach. There's a service elevator behind the kitchen. It opens onto 86th Street. The doorman has a standing instruction. If you say the word enough to him on the way out, he calls you a cab and pretends you were never here. I stared at him. You prepared an exit. I prepared 3. Why? Because if you stay tonight, I need it to be a decision. Not a trap. I didn't take off my coat, but I unclenched my hand around the pepper spray. Just slightly. Tell me everything. From the beginning. He poured 2 glasses of water. Not whiskey. Water. He set one in front of me, sat in an armchair across from a couch I hadn't sat on yet. I sat. Kept my coat on. Your father was Daniel Whittaker. He worked as a logistics manager for a company that was, in name, a freight import business. In practice, that company was a clean front for my family's old operations in the 1990s. Old operations. Yes. Why am I working for you, Lorenzo, if your family was? That, because my father wanted us out of the old operations. He had a vision. There were others in the family who didn't agree. Your father was one of the men helping him. My father worked for your father. Your father worked for my father. They were friends. Closer than friends. What did my father see? A meeting in a warehouse. People from outside the family making deals with people inside it. Money changing hands. Names changing hands. He realized some of the people my father trusted were selling him out to a rival operation. He didn't know who he could tell. He didn't know who was clean. So he ran, and he was killed 2 years later in Philadelphia by a man on the payroll of the people he had been about to expose. And you found out, not at the time. I was 12 when your father died. I didn't know about him until I was 30. 5 years ago, he looked at me for a long moment. My father was murdered 5 years ago, Adalyn. I went still. Salvatore Romano. The man who tried to take the family out of the old businesses. The man who was going to make us legitimate. He was shot in his car on a Sunday morning. Coming home from Mass, his voice didn't shake, but something underneath it did. For 3 years, I believed it was the rival operation. I spent every resource I had hunting the people I thought were responsible. Then I found a thread, a name from a file my father kept locked in a safe I didn't know existed until my mother died and the lawyers handed me the keys. Whose name? Adalyn Whittaker. Your father. I felt the room narrow. My father had been protecting your father's family, sending money to your mother for 2 years out of his own pocket after your father was killed. Through a man named Bruno. When Bruno died, the chain broke. The envelopes stopped. I closed my eyes. The envelopes weren't from my father. They were from Salvatore Romano, a man my father had once worked for. A man who had tried to keep us child fed long after the stranger was in the ground. Why are you telling me this now? Because the people who killed your father are still alive, and one of them just took an interest in you. He leaned forward. 2 weeks ago, a woman named Valentina Conti came back to New York. She is connected by blood to the rival operation that ordered your father's death. She is also our company's CFO. I stopped breathing. You let one of them work for you. I kept her close. There's a saying. I know the saying. He smiled. For the first time that night, a small, exhausted smile. 2 weeks ago, she asked a question about you to one of our security people. The question was the kind of question you only ask if you're confirming a target. What was the question? Which subway line you took home? The pepper spray in my pocket suddenly felt very small. I sat there for a long time. I drank the water. I asked questions. He answered them. Some answers were complete, some weren't. But every answer arrived without anger, without performance. This was a different Lorenzo Romano than the one who tore my reports apart. This was the man my mother had sat across from at her kitchen table 4 years ago. The man who had asked her what my favorite color was when I was 5. At 11, I stood up. He stood up. I walked to the door, picked up my bag. Turned around, I'll sign tomorrow. He didn't react, not visibly. But something at the corner of his jaw eased. Adalyn. Yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I left. Dominic was parked at the curb. He didn't say a word. He drove me to Brooklyn. I signed the contract the next morning in Lorenzo's office, with Dominic by the door and a senior attorney watching from the corner like a witness at a wedding. I signed. He signed, and the first day of the contract began. What followed was not what I had braced for. I'd been ready for control, surveillance, possession. What I got instead was a man who slept on a couch every night. For the first 6 nights, a man who took my coat when I came home and asked if I'd eaten. A man who left a glass of water on my nightstand because he'd seen me forget to hydrate during a long meeting once. A man who taught me how to read a room on the second night, how to spot exits, how to recognize when somebody was watching me in a crowd. Not bullets, not survival movie nonsense, just attention, awareness. The way a man teaches a daughter to cross the street. Why are you teaching me this? Because someday I might not be in the room. And then what? And then you'll be in the room. And you'll be ready. By the 8th night, I could leave a restaurant through a kitchen without anyone watching me do it. By the 12th, I could spot a tail in a busy subway car. He didn't romance me. He fathered me. Or he did something that wasn't fathering, but was the only word I had for it. A man teaching a young woman how to survive, not because he wanted something from her, but because he was terrified of losing her. On the 3rd Sunday, I came back from grocery shopping with Dominic 2 steps behind me. I rode the elevator up, stepped into the penthouse. Lorenzo was on the phone in his study. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could hear the language, Italian. Fast, low. I stood in the kitchen putting groceries away because somewhere in the middle of the call, a word came through the door that I recognized as Whittaker, my last name. In a stream of Italian I couldn't follow. The call ended. By the time he came out of the study, I was at the counter pretending to focus on a cutting board. "Everything okay," I said. "Family business. In Italian, sometimes." He came up behind me, kissed the top of my head, walked to the refrigerator. He acted like nothing had happened, but the word he had spoken into the phone was my name. I cut 3 carrots without registering a single motion. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the tub and texted Brianna. He just had a call. He said my name. He looked at me like nothing happened. She wrote back in 12 seconds. "Get out of there." I typed back, "Not yet." I need to know what he was saying. She didn't write back for a long time. Then AD. Be careful. The man who tells you the truth slowly is sometimes more dangerous than the one who lies fast. I put the phone down. She made a decision I didn't tell him about. The next morning, while he was in a meeting downtown, I went to his study. The door was unlocked. He had never locked it in 23 days. I walked in. The desk was clean. A photograph on the windowsill of a man in his 60s holding a young Lorenzo on his shoulders. His father touched the silver frame. Then I walked behind the desk, pulled open the second drawer. Files, manila, labeled in his neat handwriting. The third file from the front was labeled with my name, Whittaker, A. Current. Sat in his chair, opened it. The first page was a photograph of me from 16 months ago, crossing the lobby of NYU. I had never seen that photograph before. The second page was my college disciplinary record. Clean, with handwritten margin notes. Good. No exposure points. The third page was a list of every address I had lived at since I was 19. The fourth was a list of every doctor I had ever seen. The fifth was a list of every man I had ever dated. 3 names. All annotated the first one. Cleared the second one. Cleared the third one. Removed. I stared at that word. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know what it meant. I turned the page, and the page after, and then I stopped because at the bottom, under a tab marked Original Authorization, was a single document, a memo, signed by my mother, dated 4 years ago. If you ever need to protect her, do it. But she must never know unless she chooses to know. Susan Whittaker, my mother had given him permission 4 years ago to do all of this. I sat in his chair with the file in my lap. I had been beloved, protected, cared for, but still a thing managed by 2 adults who loved her too much to ever ask her what she wanted. I put the file back, closed the drawer, walked out, and I made the second decision of the day. I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. I was going to find out everything. That afternoon, I came down to the lobby to meet Brianna for coffee. A woman was standing by the doorman's desk, tall, black hair pulled into a low knot, charcoal coat over a charcoal dress. The kind of woman who didn't walk into rooms. She walked through them. She turned as I crossed the lobby. She smiled. "Miss Whittaker, yes. My name is Valentina Conti." I stopped walking. "I'm the CFO of Romano Holdings. He keeps you very close." The word landed like a small knife. "What do you want, Miss Conti?" She smiled wider. A piece of advice. From someone who knew Lorenzo before any of this, before the suits, before the company. And what's the advice? He keeps his women. A pause, until he doesn't. She tilted her head. "Ask him about Sienna." "Who?" "Sienna Marchetti. She lived in that same penthouse 3 years ago. She doesn't anymore. Ask him what happened to her." She walked past me, out the revolving door, into a black car at the curb. Gone. I rode up to the penthouse alone, opened my laptop, typed 3 words, Siena Marchetti, New York. The first result was a New York Times archive piece. 3 years ago, Siena Marchetti, 26. Italian national. Body recovered from the East River. Cause of death undetermined. I read it 3 times. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay next to him in the dark and turned the name over in my head. I waited 2 days. On the 3rd, I asked him. Across the breakfast bar, with coffee between us and the East River turning pink behind the windows, Lorenzo. Did somebody named Siena Marchetti live here? Before me, he set down his cup. Who told you that name? Valentina Conti. He closed his eyes. Breathed out. When he opened them, the man on the other side of the counter was not angry. He was tired. Siena was my cousin. On my mother's side, 26. She had a heart condition she had been hiding for 2 years. She came to New York to see a specialist at Mount Sinai. She stayed in the guest unit on the floor below this one for 4 months. She died of cardiac arrest in her sleep one night in March. The autopsy was inconclusive because she had refused to disclose her medical history to the hospital. Valentina knows all of this. Valentina also knows the building has a private dock for the river ambulance. The night Siena died, the medics took her body out through the service entrance to avoid paparazzi who were following another resident at the time. He paused. That's the body in the river. A young woman with a heart condition who died of natural causes and got carried out through the wrong door. You can prove this. I can show you her medical records. Her death certificate. Her funeral was in Milan. My mother flew her home herself. Then, why did Valentina? Because Valentina has been looking for a way to put a wedge between you and me for 2 months. She picked the dead girl with the prettiest face and the messiest exit. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said the second thing, Lorenzo. There's a file in your study, with my name on it, and a list. A boyfriend of mine. With a word next to it, his jaw tightened. Once. Then, released. Tell me what removed means. He looked at me for a long time. It means I had him followed for 3 weeks after you started dating him, because he was the son of a man on the wrong side of a payroll I had been watching for years. When I confirmed what I suspected, I had a conversation with his father. The boy was offered a job in Chicago. Triple his salary. He took it. He moved. He's married now. 2 kids. Sells commercial real estate. A pause. Removed from the city. Not removed from the earth. I closed my eyes. I had been ready to hate him, but I had asked. And he had answered. Without hesitation. Without performance. And the answers were not the answers of a monster then. Because Lorenzo Romano was not a man who took half measures. He stood up. Walked into the study. Came back with a thick folder. Set it in front of me. This is everything I've ever done. About you. About your father. About your mother. About every person in your life. You read it tonight. All of it. And then you decide if you're staying. He kissed the top of my head. I'm going to take Dominic to the office. We won't be back until late. The doorman knows you have my permission to leave at any time. The service elevator code is 6494. You don't have to tell me what you decide. If you're here when I get back, I'll know. He picked up his coat. He walked out, and I sat at the breakfast bar with the entire architecture of my own life in a folder in front of me. I opened it, I read. For 7 hours. It was almost midnight when I closed the last page. By then I knew everything, the photographs, the annotations, the men he had cleared, the man he had removed. The letters my mother had sent him over 4 years asking him to keep watching from a distance. The scholarship to NYU that he had quietly endowed 3 years before I ever heard of Romano Holdings. I had won the scholarship in a competitive process. I had earned it. He had only paid for it to exist in the first place. He had not told me. He had not told the university. He had told a single foundation administrator that he wanted a scholarship created for first-generation college students from a specific list of Brooklyn high schools. My high school was on the list. Along with 11 others, I had won it fair. But the door I had walked through, he had built the door, and on the very last page, behind a tab I almost missed, was a letter. Handwritten, on Romano Holdings' letterhead. Dated 3 months before I started at the company, addressed to himself, Adalyn. If you are reading this, it's because you found the file. I am sorry. I knew there was a chance you would. I have done what I have done because the people who killed your father are still in this world, and because the year I learned your name was the year I understood that I would not be able to live with myself. If anything happened to you, you deserve to know everything. You deserve to walk away. I will not stop you. If you stay, it will be because you chose to stay knowing all of it. That is the only way I can be with you. The only way that would mean anything. Lorenzo. I read it 3 times. I folded it. I put it back. I went to the bedroom, lay down on top of the comforter, waited. He came home at 1:15. He walked into the bedroom in his sock feet. He saw me lying there. He didn't say anything. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Lorenzo, yes, I read it. All of it. Yes, a pause. I'm not leaving. He bowed his head. Stayed like that for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Thank you, Adalyn. Don't thank me yet. You said that the first night. I meant it the first night. I mean it now. He nodded. Took off his shoes. Lay down beside me. He didn't touch me. He just lay there, breathing. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, his hand found mine across the comforter. He didn't wake up. He just held on. The next afternoon, Brianna called me. She sounded different. Addie. Can you come to my place? Now, what's wrong? There's a man here. He says he knew your father. He has photographs. He won't leave. The world tilted. Don't let him in. He's already in. He showed up half an hour ago. He has a key from my landlord. He says his name is Harold Kane. Listen to me carefully. Walk out. Right now. Don't take anything. Walk to the coffee shop on the corner of Berry and South 4th. I'm coming, Addie. He says he was FBI, Brianna. Out. Now she hung up. I called Lorenzo. He picked up on the first ring. Adalyn, there's a man at Brianna's apartment. He says his name is Harold Kane. He says he was FBI. The line was silent for 1 full second. Then, stay where you are. Do not go to Brianna. I'm sending Dominic to her. I'm coming home. Do not open the door for anyone, Lorenzo. Promise me, I promise. He hung up. 23 minutes later, Lorenzo walked in, Dominic behind him. He crossed to me, knelt down. Put his hands on my face. Are you all right? I'm fine. Where's Brianna? In a car. With one of my people. She's safe. He looked at Dominic. You stay. Front door. Service door. Both. Lorenzo turned back to me. I need to tell you something I should have told you weeks ago. Harold Kane is not a coincidence, I gathered. He worked the Romano cases at the FBI for 32 years. He retired 4 years ago. The official story is a pension. The real story is that he was forced out because there were 3 internal investigations into his contacts with the Conti operation. Nothing was ever proven. But everyone who looked at the files knew he was on their payroll. He has been for at least 15 years. He uses the FBI cover to legitimize his contact with their targets. He builds relationships. He pretends to be a friend of the deceased. He gets close enough to deliver. Deliver what? Whatever the Contis are paying for that month. Information. Access. Sometimes a body. I went still. He came to Brianna's apartment because he was trying to reach me through her. Yes. And he was going to tell me what? He was going to tell you a true story about your father, to earn your trust. And then he was going to hand you an envelope and ask you to do something with it. How do you know what was in the envelope? Because Dominic has been following Harold Kane for 2 years. We knew this was coming. We just didn't know when. I closed my eyes. Lorenzo had known. He had been waiting, Adalyn. We are going to let this play out. What? I want you to meet with him. Take whatever he gives you. Thank him. Make him think you believe him. Then Come home and give it to me. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as the trap that catches the man who is part of the network that killed your father. The honesty of it stopped me. He hadn't softened it, Lorenzo. If I say no, what happens? Then we do it another way. It takes longer. More people get hurt. But I will never put you in a room without your permission. Not once. Not ever. I looked at him. What's in the envelope? My best guess. Documents implicating my uncle in the murder of my father. Real document. Doctored to add things that aren't true. They want you to take it to the federal prosecutor. They want my uncle discredited so the Conti operation can move into the gap, your uncle. Don Giancarlo Romano, 81, sick. Living in a brownstone in Carroll Gardens with a nurse and a chess set. He was never in charge of the family. He was my father's older brother. He's been retired for 30 years. The Contes want him discredited because once he's gone, my legal authority over the family's last legitimate holdings becomes contestable. They're trying to break the family from the outside. They've been trying for 20 years. They killed my father. They killed yours. They're working on me now. They thought you were the easiest door. I stood up, walked to the windows, looked out at the river. I thought about a man in his 30s with brown eyes. I thought about a child standing at a window. I turned around. I'll do it. On one condition. When this is done, we don't kill anyone. We weren't going to. Promise me. I promise you. The meeting was set for Wednesday. In those 5 days, I sat across from Harold Kane at his kitchen table in Forest Hills. I drank his coffee. I let him tell me a story about my father that was 80% true and 20% placed to make me believe the rest. I let him show me the envelope. He told me to take it to the federal prosecutor on Monday. He told me my father would have wanted me to. I cried at his kitchen table. I cried real tears because I was the daughter of a man who hadn't been killed for telling the truth. He patted my hand. He told me to be brave. I took the envelope. I walked to the subway. I rode it back to Manhattan. I handed it to Lorenzo. He kissed my forehead. He said one word, beautiful. 3 days later, the federal prosecutor's office received an anonymous package containing copies of every document Kane had been carrying for 2 years, plus a forensic report explaining which documents were authentic and which had been doctored, plus a sworn affidavit from a former Conti operation accountant who had been waiting 14 years for the right moment to come forward. The accountant's affidavit named Harold Kane as a paid agent of the Conti operation since 2009. It named Valentina Conti as the operational manager of the network inside Romano Holdings. It named 3 other people. The federal prosecutor opened a grand jury investigation on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Harold Kane was arrested at a diner in Queens trying to eat eggs. By Sunday night, Valentina Conti had been picked up at JFK trying to board a flight to Lisbon. Don Giancarlo Romano was not charged. The doctored evidence fell apart inside a week. The forensic team identified 7 separate inconsistencies, including a font that did not exist on any government document in 1995. The case became a public scandal. Not for the Romano family, for the FBI. A retired senior agent had spent over a decade selling his cases, and in the middle of it, in a small federal courtroom on the 18th floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, my father's case was reopened. Adalyn Whittaker, killed in Philadelphia in 2009. His killer was identified by name, Vincent Marotta, who had died in a car accident 6 years before, but whose name was, for the first time in 17 years, attached to the crime he had committed, and whose victim's name was, for the first time in 17 years, spoken in a federal courtroom. Adalyn Whittaker, out loud. In a room full of strangers, I sat in the back row. Lorenzo's hand was in mine. My mother sat on my other side. She was wearing a black coat I had never seen her wear before. She had bought it that morning at a small shop on Court Street. She had told me she had not owned a black coat in 17 years. She wore it that morning. For her husband, she did not cry. She had cried enough. She held my hand the whole way through the proceeding, and when the judge spoke my father's name in the formal language of the court, my mother squeezed my hand. Once, hard, and then she let out a breath I had not known she had been holding since I was 7 years old. After the proceeding, we walked out into a November afternoon. Lorenzo did not come to dinner with us that night. He understood that the table belonged to my mother and me. We ate at a small restaurant on Smith Street. We talked. We laughed. Once, when the check came, my mother put her hand on mine. Adalyn. Yes, the man who has been protecting you. Do you love him? I thought about it. About a man who slept on a couch for 6 nights without being asked. About a hand finding mine in the dark at 2 in the morning. About a folder full of every secret he had ever kept, handed to me across a breakfast bar. About a man who had built a door and waited 7 years and let me walk through it on my own. I love him, Mom. She nodded. Be careful with him, baby, I will, and be careful with yourself. You are not a continuation of your father. You are not a reward for his suffering. You are your own woman. Whatever you build with this man, build it because you want it, not because the universe owes you anything. I had spent 17 years believing my mother was a woman who had survived a heartbreak. I was now sitting across from a woman who had survived a war, a woman who had lied to a child for 17 years to keep that child breathing. I leaned across the table. Mom. Thank you. She closed her eyes. She held my face in her hands. You're welcome, Addie. You're welcome, baby. She kissed my forehead, the way my father had kissed it the night he packed his bag, but the story did not end at that dinner table. It only paused because there were names in that affidavit I had not yet thought about. And there were people on the other side of this case who had not been arrested, and there were 5 years of silence ahead. 5 years before the past would walk back into my apartment. I just didn't know it that night. I thought it was over. It wasn't. The year that followed was a year of becoming. I quit Romano Holdings the week after Don Giancarlo's exoneration was finalized in the press. I had learned that the table at Romano Holdings had been built by men I would never meet, and that the only honest thing I could do was build a table of my own. I enrolled in night classes at Pace Law School, a scholarship for adult learners. This one I had earned. I had taken the LSAT in February, scored in the 98th percentile. Written my application essay about a Brooklyn child standing at a window for 17 years, and the day she found out she had been waiting for the wrong thing. I was going to become a federal prosecutor. I told Lorenzo first. He looked at me for a long moment, smiled. The kind of smile that started at the eyes. You'll be very good at it. I might one day prosecute someone you used to know. I'd expect nothing less. He kissed me, held me. Said something quietly in Italian, a phrase. I asked him what it meant. He smiled. I'll tell you later. I told him I was going to make him tell me eventually. He told me he believed me. Romano Holdings became, by the end of that year, a fully legitimate, publicly traded company. The last of the family's older operations were closed. Dominic Reyes ran security for the company. He had never raised his voice in my presence. He never would. Brianna Holloway opened a graphic design studio in Dumbo with a small business loan I had co-signed. Her first major client was a federal nonprofit that worked on cases of organized crime victim restitution. I asked her once if she was nervous about being so close to that world. She told me, your family made me an honorary niece. I'm fine, she was right. My mother moved out of the apartment I had grown up in, 3 blocks, into a small 1-bedroom with a window that faced east. She had spent 17 years living in a place that faced west. She told me she had decided to stop watching the sunset. She had decided to watch the sunrise. She and Lorenzo had dinner together once a month, just the two of them. I was not invited. The first time I asked Lorenzo what they talked about, he said, "Your mother is teaching me how to be a person who deserves your love." It's a long conversation. I never asked again. On a Saturday morning that fall, I stood at a grave in a small cemetery in Queens. My father's name was finally on the headstone. For 17 years, my mother had not been able to bring herself to put it there, because for 17 years she had not known if his death had a meaning she could write down. Now she did. Adalyn Whittaker. Beloved husband, beloved father, a man who saw the truth and did not look away. My mother stood next to me, held my hand. Her hand was steady. Behind us, at a respectful distance, stood Lorenzo. He did not approach. He waited. A man who understood that some moments belong to the people who lost the most. I knelt down, placed a white rose at the base of the headstone, whispered something only my father could hear. I stood up, turned around, walked to Lorenzo. He opened his arms. I stepped into them. My mother joined us a moment later. She put a hand on Lorenzo's arm. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The three of us stood under a November sky, and I understood something then, that my father had not left me, that he had been with me every day, in the choices I made and the spine I straightened when no one was watching, that the man behind me, holding me in the cemetery cold, was not a debt I had inherited from my father. He was a future my father had wanted for me, a future where the truth got to stand in courtrooms, a future where the past got to rest in the ground. I held my mother, I held Lorenzo. I let the wind take the 17 years away. I thought I was holding the whole story in my arms that morning, most of it, but not all. Some of it was still walking around, attending Mass on Staten Island. I just did not know his name yet. I would not learn it for 5 more years. 5 years passed. 5 years is enough time for a city to forget a courtroom. Enough time for a young woman to walk into Pace Law School with a borrowed messenger bag and walk out of it with a federal clerkship. Enough time for a man to take a family that had spent a century in the dark and walk it into the light. Enough time for a mother to stop sleeping with the lamp on. But 5 years is also not enough time. Not for some things. It was a Tuesday in March when the past walked back in. I had just turned 29. I had been a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York for 14 months. Organized crime division. I had not told my mother that the only file cabinet in my office I would never touch was the one labeled Romano. My boss knew. He had asked me one question in the interview. "Miss Whittaker, there is a man whose last name you share a kitchen with. Will that be a problem?" It will not, because his last name and mine are the same on the lease. Not on any indictment. He had hired me. I was good at the job, very good. I had put away 3 captains of a banana crew in my first year. Built a wire case against a Brighton Beach operation that had been running unbothered since the late 90s. But on that Tuesday in March, my office phone rang, Federal Bureau of Investigation. New York Field Office, Whittaker. This is Special Agent Teresa Park, Organized Crime Task Force. I need to speak with you about a case we are opening today, in person. Now, I'll be in the field office in 30 minutes. No, I'll come to you. There are reasons. She hung up. I stared at the receiver. I had been a prosecutor for 14 months. I had never had an agent refuse to meet at the field office. Refusing meant the field office itself had ears in it that someone did not trust. That was a new sentence in my life. 20 minutes later, Teresa Park walked into my office, late 40s, short black hair, grey suit, posture of a woman who had been carrying a sidearm under a blazer for 20 years. She closed the door. She did not sit. "I need to ask you a question. I need an honest answer. I'm not recording. This is just a conversation. Ask it." When was the last time you spoke to Lorenzo Romano about a man named Marco Petrosino? The name did not mean anything to me. I don't know that name. She watched my face for a long second. Are you sure? I'm sure. She breathed out. Sat down. Marco Petrosino was a Conti operation lieutenant. He was in protective custody in Arizona starting 11 years ago. He testified against the operation in 2 separate trials, given a new name, a new face, a new state, and 4 days ago his body went in a desert outside of Tucson. 2 rounds. Back of the head. I felt the room get very quiet. He was the witness who named Harold Kane. He was the witness who named Harold Kane. And Valentina Conti, and 5 other people. Who else has been compromised? That's what I'm here to find out. The Marshal Service has 6 other former Conti witnesses in the program. 3 of them are showing irregularities. 2 have stopped checking in entirely. You think there's a leak? I know there's a leak. The only person who had access to Petrosino's current location was a clerk in the Tucson field office. The clerk's bank account, 2 months ago, received a wire transfer from a shell company. She paused. That shell company, 3 years ago, was paying a salary to a woman who used to work in the accounting department of Romano Holdings. I closed my eyes. Park? Yes. Tell me what you're asking me. She looked at me. I am asking you whether the man you go home to at night has been quietly cleaning up loose ends from the case that put away Harold Kane and Valentina Conti. I am asking you whether the witnesses who put away the people who tried to kill you are now being killed by the man who saved you. I am asking because if you answer it for me, this stops being a thing I have to chase through a federal grand jury and becomes a thing we can handle quietly. Between you and me, I looked at her. She was a good agent. She had not come to threaten me. She had come because she trusted me. She wanted to give me the chance to make this easier for both of us. I felt the floor of my office shift, not the dramatic shift of Romano Tower 5 years ago. A smaller one, an uglier one, because this floor was mine, this office was mine, this badge was mine. And the question Teresa Park was asking was whether the man whose ring I had been wearing for 2 years had been undoing everything I had spent 5 years building. Park? Yes, I don't know. I said it. And the moment I said it, I knew it was true. I had been so busy building a life that I had not been watching the corners of it, and in the corners. A man I knew very well could have been doing things I would never have permitted. Park, I need 24 hours. I can give you 48. Thank you. She walked to the door. Paused, Miss Whittaker. If it turns out he's the leak, I need you to make a decision about who you are going to be. I know. She left. I sat at my desk for a long time. I picked up my phone. I did not call Lorenzo. I called Dominic. He answered on the second ring. Adalyn, Dominic. I need to come to your apartment tonight. Not Lorenzo's. Yours. I need to ask you questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Even if the answers make my life harder. A long pause then. Be here at 8. I'll cook. He hung up. Dominic had said 3 sentences in a row to me on a phone that had never happened before, which meant he had been waiting for this call. Which meant Teresa Park was right about something. I just did not yet know how much. Dominic Reyes lived in a brownstone in Carroll Gardens. I walked up the stoop at 8. The smell of garlic and oregano drifted out before I rang the bell. He opened the door. White t-shirt. Apron tied around his waist. Dish towel over his shoulder. He stepped aside. Come in. The brownstone was small inside, warm, books on every wall, a wood-burning stove glowing in the corner. A black cat on a chair that did not look up when I entered. Dominic gestured me to a stool, poured red wine, set down a plate of antipasti. He did not sit. He continued cooking. Talk. I talked. I told him everything in 8 minutes. When I was done, he turned off the burner, turned around, leaned against the counter. Then he said the longest sentence I had ever heard him say, Adalyn. I have known Lorenzo Romano since we were 10 years old. I have worked for him for 14. There are very few things he has done in those years that I do not know about, because most of them I did, with him or for him, and I am telling you now, with my hand on a wooden spoon and a cat in the next room, that Lorenzo Romano has not killed Marco Petrosino. He has not killed any of the witnesses. He did not take that money out of that shell company. He does not know any of these names, because if he did, I would know. And I do not know. I exhaled. I had not realized I had been holding my breath, Dominic. Then who? He picked up the spoon, stirred the pot one slow turn, set the spoon down, sat down across from me. 5 years ago, when Harold Kane was arrested, and Valentina Conti was picked up at JFK, there were 6 other names on the affidavit our accountant signed. 3 were arrested. 1 died of natural causes before he could be charged. 1 left the country, and 1 was never charged, because the evidence against him was thin, because his lawyer was very good, and because he had a long-standing arrangement with 2 members of the federal task force that no one wanted to disturb. Who? His name is Salvatore Conti. No relation by blood to Valentina. Same operation. He was Anthony Conti's second cousin. He was the man who actually paid Vincent Marotta in 2009 to kill your father in Philadelphia. I went stills. Salvatore Conti is alive, 63 years old. Lives in a house on Staten Island. He has a wife. He has 3 grown children. He attends Mass every Sunday morning at St. Joseph's. He has been quietly rebuilding the Conti operation for 5 years. Why have I not known this for 5 years? He looked at me, because Lorenzo asked me not to tell you. Why? Because you were studying for the bar. Because you were starting your career. Because he wanted you to have 1 year of a normal life that did not have his family in it. Because he loves you. And because he was afraid that if you knew Salvatore Conti was still walking around, you would not be able to stop yourself from going after him. And he was right. He was right. I closed my eyes. The man who had paid for my father's death had been attending Mass on Staten Island 5 years. 5 years. I opened my eyes. Lorenzo knew this. The whole time. He knew. Is he going to tell me? Dominic looked at me for a long moment. He is going to tell you tonight. Because I am going to send him a message in the next 10 minutes. He is going to come over. He is going to answer every question you ask him, for as long as you want to ask them, because the man you married is many things. But he is not a man who would hide this from you for 1 more night once he understood that you were ready to hear it, Dominic. Send the message. He sent it. He pushed a plate of pasta toward me. Eat. He'll be here in 20 minutes. You're going to want food in you for the next conversation. I ate. Lorenzo walked through the door 18 minutes later. He did not take off his coat. He looked at me. He looked at Dominic. Dominic nodded once. Lorenzo sat down across from me, folded his hands on the table. He looked at me, asked me. I asked him every question. About Salvatore Conti, about the Mass on Staten Island, about the rebuilding of the operation, about the bribed clerk in Tucson, about the body in the desert, about every promise he had made to me 5 years ago. He answered every question. He did not soften them. He did not perform. He did not apologize. He just answered. He told me Salvatore Conti had been on his radar for 4.5 years. That he had been gathering evidence, that he had been waiting for the right moment to deliver it, that he had not delivered it yet because the people inside the federal task force who were supposed to receive it had been compromised. He told me that he had personally never harmed a witness, that he had never authorized harm to a witness, that the killings had to be the works of Salvatore Conti cleaning his own house. He told me that the reason he had not told me was that he had wanted me to have a year of being a prosecutor before this conversation. He told me he had been wrong. He told me he should have told me the day I was sworn. He told me he had made a mistake, and that he was sorry. He told me one more thing. I have the file. The whole file. Everything I have on Salvatore Conti. Every shell company. Every bribed clerk. Every witness. Every dollar. I will bring it to you tomorrow morning at your federal office building. I will sign a statement attesting to its origin. I will testify to a grand jury. I will do whatever is required to make sure that the man who paid to kill your father dies in a federal cell. I looked at him. You should have told me 5 years ago. I should have. You took my choice. I did, Lorenzo. This is the line, I know. If you ever take a choice like this from me again, I will leave, I know. Say it. If I ever take a choice like this from you again, you will leave. And you will be right to. He bowed his head. I sat in Dominic's kitchen with a half-eaten plate of pasta. I thought about a girl who had been 7 years old at a window. About a girl who had been 24 on the 42nd floor. About a woman who was now 29 in a brownstone in Carroll Gardens. 3 different women. Each one having to decide what to do with what she had been handed. I reached across the table. Took Lorenzo's hand. Bring me the file in the morning, I will. And then we are going to put Salvatore Conti away. Together. The right way, through my office. In a courtroom. Not in a desert. And you and I are going to talk about the things you have not told me. Every one of them. Tonight, in your office. With Dominic in the room. From this moment forward, there will be no more files I do not know about. No more witnesses I do not know about. No more dinners with my mother I do not know about. Do you understand? He looked up. His eyes were wet. I understand you. The case took 18 months. 18 months of grand jury testimony. 18 months of subpoenaed financial records. 18 months of cooperating witnesses being moved into new programs. 18 months of me sitting in a federal courtroom for hearings that did not have my name on them, but whose every motion I had drafted at midnight at a kitchen counter, with a husband across from me reading transcripts, and a cat we had adopted from Dominic asleep between us. The cat's name was Bruno. Lorenzo had named him after the man who had carried envelopes from Salvatore Romano to my mother for 4 years. I had cried when he told me the name. I had said yes. The case against Salvatore Conti was assigned to a colleague of mine, a woman named Anjali Rao, 41, the best courtroom attorney I had ever seen. I worked on the case at every level except the one that counted. I built the evidence packet. I cross-referenced the witness statements. I traced the shell companies through 3 jurisdictions and 2 offshore registries. But I did not stand in the courtroom. I could not. Because Salvatore Conti was the man who had paid for the murder of my father, and no judge in the Southern District would have allowed his daughter to argue the case. Anjali Rao argued it. She argued for 9 weeks. She put 22 witnesses on the stand. She put Lorenzo Romano on the stand for 11 hours over 3 days. He testified to every meeting, every shell company, every wire transfer, every conversation he had monitored, every dollar he had traced, every false document he had identified. He did not waver. He did not perform. He did not look at me once during the 11 hours. He looked at the jury. He told them what he knew, and on the 9th week, the jury came back in 4 hours with 23 guilty verdicts. Salvatore Conti was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. He was 65 years old. He would die in a cell. The day of the sentencing, I sat in the back row of the courtroom with my mother on one side, and Lorenzo on the other, and Brianna behind us. When the bailiff led Salvatore Conti out of the courtroom in chains, my mother let out a breath. She turned to me. "He's where he belongs now, baby," I said. "He is, Mom." We walked out together. The press was waiting on the steps. A reporter from the Times stepped forward, Miss Whittaker. "Is there anything you would like to say?" I looked at the cameras, at the courthouse. I said one sentence. My father's name was Daniel Whittaker. He was a good man. He saw the truth. He did not look away. Today, neither did we. I walked away. I held my mother on one side. I held Lorenzo on the other. The press let us go. That night, we had dinner at our apartment. My mother, Lorenzo Dominic, Brianna, Anjali Rao, who had become a friend over 18 months. We did not talk about the case. We talked about Brianna's studio, about the publishing house Anjali's wife was about to open, about the trip my mother was taking to Italy in the spring with a friend from her parish to visit Bruno's grave in a small cemetery in Naples that Lorenzo had located for her 2 years ago. We laughed. We ate. We toasted my father once, just once, when everyone went home. Lorenzo and I stood at the windows of our apartment, looking out at the East River. He put his arms around me from behind, kissed the top of my head. He said something quietly in Italian, a phrase. I turned around. I looked at him. I had been with this man for 6 years. I had built a life with him. I had walked into a federal courtroom on behalf of people whose stories nobody else would tell. And I was tired of waiting for later, Lorenzo. Tell me what it means. He looked at me for a long moment, then he smiled, a real smile. The kind that started at the eyes. It means, I am home. I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead against his chest. I let myself be held by a man who had spent 20 years learning how to deserve the woman he had decided to protect when he was 30 years old. A man who had failed sometimes, who had taken choices that were not his to take, who had been corrected by me and by my mother and by Dominic and by Brianna, and who had each time chosen to do the work of correction rather than the easier work of defense. A man who had never been perfect, but who had been honest enough to keep becoming. Outside, the river ran toward the harbor. The woman standing at the window was different from the one who had walked into Romano Tower at 24. She was different from the one who had stood in the cemetery at 25. She was different from the one who had sat in Dominic's kitchen at 29. She was a woman who had been 7 years old at a window in Brooklyn, waiting for a father who was already dead. She was a woman who had become a prosecutor. She was a woman who had put the man who paid for her father's murder in a federal cell with her own evidence and her own years of work. She was a woman who had married the man who had built the door, not because she owed him her life, but because he had grown into a man worth choosing, and the contract she had signed in a leather folder one Tuesday morning in November 6 years ago was not a contract for 30 days of protection. It was a contract she had ended up writing herself, in her own handwriting, in a federal courtroom, in a kitchen in Carroll Gardens, in a cemetery in Queens, in a small one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, where her mother had finally turned off the lamp. I turned away from the window. I took Lorenzo's hand. I led him to the kitchen. The cat jumped down from the bookshelf and followed. I put the kettle on. The kettle began to sing, and for the first time in my life, I did not need to listen for anything else. Not for a father at a window, not for a black car on a sidewalk, not for footsteps in a corridor, just the kettle. And the cat, and the man across the kitchen from me, watching me with the patience of a person who finally had nowhere else to be. I poured 2 cups. I carried them to the small table by the window. He sat across from me. We drank our tea. We did not say anything for a long time. We did not have to, because the morning was already coming. And it was ours. Spring came late that year. I remember because I was standing at the kitchen window of the apartment on a Tuesday morning in April, watching the first of the cherry trees along the East River try to decide whether the air was warm enough. The kettle was on. Bruno was on the windowsill. And Lorenzo was at the table behind me, reading the Times the way he had read it every morning for 6 years. Front page first, business section second, sports section never. I was 31 years old. I had been a federal prosecutor for 3 years. I had been Lorenzo Romano's wife, for 4, and I had spent the night before sitting up at 1 in the morning staring at a positive pregnancy test on the bathroom counter. I had not told him yet. I had told no one yet, not Brianna, not my mother, not Dominic. The test was wrapped in a tissue at the bottom of my coat pocket because I had not been able to make myself throw it away, and I had not been able to make myself leave it on the counter where he might have seen it before I had the chance to say the words out loud. So I had wrapped it. I had put it in a coat I had not worn yesterday. I had walked into the kitchen this morning like a woman who was going to make tea and read the paper and tell her husband at some point. I just did not know when. He looked up from the newspaper. He looked at me. He set the paper down. He said, "Adalyn, yes, tell me." I poured 2 cups, set them down on the table. I sat across from him. I looked at him. And the thing I had not been able to make myself say for 14 hours just came out the way truth comes out when you stop holding it. I'm pregnant. He did not move for 1 full second. Then he closed his eyes. He put his hands flat on the table. He breathed in, out, in, out. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. He did not say anything. He just reached across the table. He took my hand. He held it. He held it for a long time, and then he said, "Adalyn, yes, are you happy?" I had not expected the question, but the moment he asked it, I knew the answer. "I am." He smiled, the kind of smile that started at the eyes and worked its way down. "Then I am happy too." He stood up, walked around the table, knelt down beside me. He put his hand on my stomach. Not flat, not heavy, just resting there, the way a man rests his hand on a door he has been waiting to walk through for his entire life. He said something quietly in Italian, a phrase I did not recognize. He looked up at me. "What does it mean?" I asked. He smiled. "It means welcome home." I closed my eyes. I let him hold me there for a long time. Bruno jumped down from the windowsill and walked over and sat on the floor next to Lorenzo and waited the way cats wait when they have decided that something important is happening in the room and they would like to be considered part of it. I told my mother that afternoon. She cried for 10 minutes. Then she made me promise not to tell Brianna before she could tell her, because she wanted to be the one to call her honorary niece and deliver the news with all the proper drama. I let her. Brianna called me 6 minutes later. She said 3 sentences. The first was, "Adalyn Whittaker Romano." The second was, "I am going to be an aunt." The third was, "If it's a girl, her middle name is Brianna." I laughed for the first time that day. I told her we would talk about it. She told me there was nothing to talk about. I let her have it. Dominic showed up at the apartment that evening with a paper bag from the Italian bakery, 2 blocks from his brownstone. He set the bag on the counter. He did not say anything. He kissed my cheek. He left. I opened the bag. It was a single sfogliatella. Still warm, there was a small note in the bag, 3 words, in Dominic's neat block printing. For the mother, I cried over the bakery counter for a solid 2 minutes. Lorenzo came up behind me. Read the note over my shoulder, wrapped his arms around me, did not say anything. He just held me while I cried over a pastry from a man who had known him since they were both 10 years old. The first trimester passed. I did not tell my office until the 2nd trimester. My boss was a man in his late 50s named Marcus Hale. He had been a federal prosecutor for 31 years. He had 3 grown daughters of his own. He had hired me on the recommendation of a federal judge who had clerked with him at the same firm 40 years ago. When I sat down across from him and told him I was pregnant, he looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Whittaker, yes, how are you feeling about your caseload? I want to keep working. You're going to keep working. I just want to know if you want to keep the violent cases or rotate to the white-collar division for a while. I want to rotate." Done. He stood up, walked around the desk, hugged me. He had never hugged me before. He held me at arm's length and said, "Whittaker, you are about to find out that the most powerful thing you have ever been is whatever you are about to become next." He let me go. He sat back down. He said, "Now get out of my office. I have a brief to read." I left. I sat in my own office for 10 minutes with the door closed. Then I called Lorenzo and told him. He said, "Marcus is a good man." I said, "He is." He said, "We should have him to dinner." I said, "We will." The pregnancy went well. No complications. No drama. Just a slow, careful expansion of a body that I had not known could hold this much hope without breaking. My mother came over twice a week. She brought soup. She brought books. She brought small things she had been saving for 30 years in a closet she had not opened since before I was born. A baby blanket she had made by hand the year she met my father. A silver rattle that had belonged to her own mother. A small wooden cross that had hung over my crib when I was a baby, and that she had taken down the night my father did not come home. She put it back on the wall of the nursery one Sunday afternoon, while Lorenzo painted the trim. She did not say anything. She just hung it. She stepped back, looked at it, wiped her eyes. She said, "Your father would have loved this room," I said. "He's in it, Mum." She nodded. She did not cry. She had cried enough. The baby was a girl. We named her Hannah, after Hannah Whittaker, my father's mother, a woman I had never met, who had died of a stroke a year before my father did, in a small town in Pennsylvania I had visited exactly once in my life when I was 4. My father had loved his mother very much. He had told my mother that if they ever had a daughter, he wanted to name her after his mother. My mother had been holding that name in her pocket for 25 years, waiting for someone to give her permission to take it out. She gave it to me on a Wednesday afternoon when she came over for tea and watched me put a small blue dress on my swollen belly and ask her what she thought of the name Hannah. She closed her eyes. She breathed. When she opened them, she said, "Your father would have loved that," and then she cried for the first time in a long time. The way a mother cries when the daughter she has been carrying for 31 years finally hands her a piece of the past she did not know she was still allowed to want. Hannah was born on a Tuesday morning in October. I had not expected the Tuesday, but every story in my life had begun on a Tuesday, so it felt right that this one would begin on one too. Lorenzo was in the delivery room. My mother was in the waiting room. Brianna was in the waiting room. Dominic was in the waiting room. Marcus Hale was in the waiting room. Because when I had told him in August that I was due in October, he had written it on his calendar in pen and shown up the moment I had texted him from the hospital at 4 in the morning. When the nurse handed Hannah to me, she was small and warm and quiet, and looked at me with the kind of focused, suspicious calm that babies have for the first few minutes of their life. The way a cat looks at a room it has just been carried into. I looked at her. She looked at me. I said, "Hi, Hannah." She blinked. Lorenzo sat standing beside the bed, made a sound I had never heard him make before. A small broken sound, the sound of a man whose chest had finally cracked open in the right place. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his hand on Hannah's tiny back. He said something in Italian. A whole sentence this time. I did not ask him what it meant. I knew. It was the same phrase he had said to my belly 6 months earlier. Welcome home. The years went by. Hannah turned 1. Hannah turned 2. Hannah turned 3. Each year, on the Saturday closest to her birthday, we drove to the cemetery in Queens where my father was buried. We brought a white rose. We let Hannah hold it. The first year she put it on the headstone upside down. The second year she put it on the right way and patted the stone with her small hand and said, "Hi, Grandpa." The third year she sat on the grass next to the stone and told my father about the goldfish we had bought her for her birthday. I sat on the grass next to her. I listened to my daughter tell my father about a goldfish. I did not cry. I had cried enough. And I had learned the thing that nobody tells you about grief that has finally been put to rest. It does not leave. It just changes shape. It becomes the small hand patting a headstone. It becomes the goldfish my father will never see swim. It becomes the wooden cross above a crib that had been put away for 30 years and was now hanging again on a wall that had been waiting to hold it. Grief becomes inheritance. And inheritance, if you are lucky, becomes joy. My mother lived to see Hannah turn 5. She died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in March, in the small one-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from where I had grown up. She had spent the previous evening at our apartment, eating pasta with Lorenzo and Hannah, and reading Hannah the same children's book she had read to me when I was 3 years old. She had kissed Hannah on the forehead before leaving. She had told her, "I love you very much, sweetheart." Hannah had said, "I love you too, Grandma." And my mother had walked out into the April evening with a small smile on her face and a copy of the children's book in her purse, because she had been planning to read it again to Hannah the next afternoon. The next afternoon never came. I found her at noon when I went to her apartment to pick her up for lunch. She was in her bed. Her hands were folded on her chest. There was a photograph on her nightstand. My father, holding me. I was 3 years old. I had not known she still had that photograph. I had not seen it in 28 years. She had been keeping it in a drawer. She had taken it out the night she died and put it on the nightstand and gone to bed looking at it. I sat down on the edge of her bed. I held her hand. It was cold, but it was still her hand. I sat there for a long time before I called anyone. I sat there until the light through the east-facing window had moved across the floor and onto the wall and onto the photograph and onto her face. The sunrise she had moved across the city to watch. I said, "Hi, Mom." I said, "Thank you, Mom." I said, "I'll take care of Hannah. I'll take care of Lorenzo. I'll take care of all of us." I said, "Go find Daddy. He's been waiting." I called Lorenzo. He came. He sat next to me on the bed. He took my mother's other hand. He said something quietly in Italian. I did not ask him what it meant this time. I just let him hold her hand while I held the other one. We buried my mother next to my father in the cemetery in Queens. The headstone now had both of their names, Susan Whittaker, beloved wife, beloved mother, a woman who told a lie to save a life and lived to see the truth. Hannah, who was 5, did not understand. She put a rose on her grandmother's grave. She patted the stone. She said, "Hi, Grandma." She sat on the grass and told my mother about the new dress she was wearing. I sat next to her and listened. Lorenzo stood behind us. He put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not have to. Hannah turned 10. Hannah turned 12. Hannah turned 15. She looked like my mother. She had her grandfather's eyes. She had her father's quiet, focused attention. She had my stubbornness. She had Brianna's sense of humor, 'cause she had spent so many Saturdays with Brianna that some of it had passed through the air and into her. She'd had Dominic's hands. The kind of hands that knew how to be still. She came home from school one Tuesday afternoon when she was 16 and sat down at the kitchen counter and said, "Mom, yes, I want to be a federal prosecutor." I put down the knife I was using to chop onions. I looked at her. She looked at me. She was 16. She had her grandfather's brown eyes. She had my jaw. She had a stack of textbooks on the counter and a small ink stain on her cuff, and the same look of focused certainty I had seen on her father's face the morning he had handed me a folder full of every secret he had ever kept. I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I read the file." "What file?" "The one you keep in the safe in the office. The one about Grandpa." I had not known she had ever seen it. I had never shown it to her. I had been waiting for her to be 18. She was 16. She had found it. She had read it. She had understood it. She was watching me now with the calm of a girl who had already had the conversation with herself before she ever opened her mouth. I sat down on the stool across from her. I looked at my daughter. I said, "Hannah, yes. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." I closed my eyes. I thought about a girl who had been 7 years old at a window in Brooklyn. I thought about a girl who had been 24 on the 42nd floor. I thought about a woman who had become a prosecutor. And I thought about a daughter who had just become the next link in a chain that had started in a warehouse in 1990-something, with a man who had seen the wrong people in the wrong room. I opened my eyes. I said, "Then you'll be very good at it." She smiled. Her grandfather's smile. She said, "I know." I laughed. I told her she was going to make me cry in front of the onions. She told me she would help me chop them. She walked around the counter. She picked up the knife. She started chopping. Her hands were steady, the way her grandfather's hands had been steady, the way her father's hands had been steady, the way mine were on a good day when I was holding a knife in my own kitchen and watching my own daughter learn to do the same. I stood next to her. I watched her work. Lorenzo walked in from the living room. He saw us. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at his daughter chopping onions next to her mother in a kitchen on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He looked at me. He smiled. The kind of smile that started at the eyes. I smiled back. He walked into the kitchen. He picked up a wooden spoon. He stirred the pot on the stove. The three of us cooked dinner together that night. Bruno, who was now 12 years old and grey around the muzzle, sat on the windowsill and watched the river. The light moved across the floor. The kettle, which I had put on without thinking, began to sing. I poured 3 cups. I carried them to the table by the window. Hannah sat down. Lorenzo sat down. I sat down. We drank our tea. We did not say anything for a long time. We did not have to, because the night was coming, and it was ours, and the morning was coming after it, and that was ours too, and every Tuesday after that, and every November, and every cherry tree along the East River that would try year after year to decide whether the air was warm enough. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my husband. I looked at the river outside the window. I thought about the 7-year-old girl at a window in Brooklyn. I told her, in my head, what I had been trying to tell her for 38 years. You were not waiting for nothing. You were waiting for this. The 7-year-old did not answer. She did not have to. She had already heard me. She had heard me the first time I knelt at her father's grave at 25. She had heard me again the night I told Lorenzo I was pregnant. She had heard me the morning Hannah was born. She had heard me every time, in every kitchen, in every courtroom, in every cemetery, in every small one-bedroom apartment where a lamp had once been left on all night. She had been listening her whole life, and now, finally, she could rest. I drank my tea. The river ran. The bridge hummed. Bruno purred on the windowsill, and the contract I had signed in a leather folder one Tuesday morning in November, a long time ago, was not a contract for 30 days, was not a contract for 1 year, was not even a contract for the rest of my life. It was a contract for the next one too. For Hannah. For whoever Hannah would one day raise, for whatever they would inherit, and whatever they would set down, and whatever truth they would find the courage to say out loud in a courtroom on a Tuesday morning, in some November none of us would live to see. I looked at my daughter chopping onions. I looked at my husband stirring a pot. I looked at a city I had spent the better part of my life learning how to defend. I closed my eyes. I let it be. The kettle was still singing in another room, the way kettles do when nobody remembers to take them off the burner. I got up. I walked into the kitchen. I turned off the stove. I came back to the table. Lorenzo looked at me. Hannah looked at me. I sat down. I picked up my cup. I took a sip. I said, "It's a good night," Hannah said. "It is, Mom," Lorenzo said. "It is, my love." The wind outside the window moved through the cherry trees. The trees decided. They bloomed.